Have you ever helped someone when no one was watching? Fed a stranger, sheltered the lost, given without expectation of return? We tell ourselves these small mercies vanish into the ether of daily life, unrecorded, unremembered. But what if every kindness is a seed planted in unseen soil? What if, decades later, when your world is crumbling and powerful forces have stacked the deck against you, that single seed pushes through concrete to become your shelter? This is what happened when a boy whispered a promise on a feverish night, and a woman worked alone for 20 years, not knowing she was watering something that would one day save everything she loved. What would you do if the child you fed returned as the only wall between you and ruin? If you found a hungry child on your property, would your first instinct be to call authorities or bring them inside? The dirt road didn't so much end as surrender. Paving gave way to gravel, gravel to packed earth, and finally to twin ruts worn deep by a single set of tires over 30 seasons. At the terminus stood a fence whose gate hung slightly crooked, like a tired man leaning on one hip. Beyond it, the Hart farm spread across 47 acres of stubborn Pennsylvania soil. Mabel Hart was 54 the year the boy appeared. Her age showed not in wrinkles, but in economy of movement. She lifted, carried, and planted with minimal motion, conserving energy as instinctively as she breathed. The farm was neither prosperous nor failing. It existed in a state of persistent equilibrium, like a pond that neither floods nor dries, sustained by will as much as water. That September afternoon held the year's first true chill. Mabel hauled water from the hand pump near the kitchen door, the bucket's weight familiar in her rope-burned palms. She was halfway to the tomato beds when peripheral movement caught her eye, not the quick scatter of rabbits or the deliberate stalk of deer, but something hesitant, human. A boy stood at the tree line where her property met what remained of the county woods. He was thin in the way that spoke of missed meals rather than natural leanness. His jeans were too short, showing pale ankles above cracked leather shoes. A faded backpack slumped from one shoulder. Mabel set the bucket down. She didn't call out. She waited, hands on her hips, watching as he took one step, then another, toward the house. His eyes flicked between her, the farmhouse, and the road behind him as if calculating escape routes. "You lost?" she asked when he was 20 feet away. He stopped. "No, ma'am." "Then you're trespassing." "I know." He didn't apologize. His voice was flat, drained of the fear she expected. "I was walking. Saw your garden." She studied him. Dirt etched the lines of his knuckles. His nails were bitten to quick. But it was his stillness that struck her. The absolute absence of fidgeting, as if movement itself cost calories he couldn't spare. "How long since you ate?" He shrugged, a non-answer that told her everything. Mabel pointed to the porch. "Sit there. Don't touch anything." He obeyed without question, lowering himself onto the top step with a weariness that belonged to someone 3 times his age. She went inside, emerging minutes later with a chipped plate, holding 2 slices of cornbread and a mound of black-eyed peas left from yesterday's supper. She handed it to him wordlessly. He ate with controlled desperation, not shoveling but chewing each bite thoroughly, extracting every possible nutrient. When he finished, he placed the plate neatly beside him and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Thank you," he said, meeting her eyes for the first time. They were hazel, lighter at the center like creek stones turned in the sun. "Name?" "Daniel." "Last name?" He hesitated. "Miller, but I'm not with them anymore." Mabel didn't press. The them could be parents, foster care, relatives. It didn't matter. What mattered was the raw honesty in his avoidance. He wasn't lying, he was omitting, and in her experience, omission was often the closest thing to truth people in pain could manage. "Parents?" Gone. One word, final as a slammed door. Night was falling fast, the sky bleeding purple at the edges. Mabel made a decision she wouldn't understand for 20 years. There's a blanket and pillow in the hall closet. You can sleep on the couch tonight. In the morning, we'll figure out what's next. He didn't thank her again, just nodded as if he'd expected this, as if his entire journey had been toward this particular couch in this particular farmhouse. She showed him where the bathroom was, gave him a towel that had grown thin with washing, and left him there. That night, lying in her own bed, Mabel listened to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in her house, the creak of floorboards, the sigh of springs as he settled on the old sofa. She hadn't shared this space since her sister passed a decade ago. The silence had become a companion, one she'd learned to interpret. The house settling was its breathing, the wind at the windows its whispering. Now, a new rhythm entered the mix. She wondered briefly if she was being foolish. The neighbors already considered her eccentric, the woman who worked land alone, who spoke to her crops, who attended church but never stayed for coffee hour. Taking in a stray child would cement her reputation as the county oddity. But then she remembered his hands, how they'd trembled slightly as he lifted the cornbread, not from fear, but from weakness. The body's honest betrayal when it nears its limits. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow I'll call social services. Tomorrow I'll do the responsible thing. Outside, an owl called. Daniel coughed once in his sleep. And Mabel Hart, who had built her life around routines as fixed as the seasons, felt the first subtle shift in the tectonic plates of her world. Daniel didn't leave in the morning, nor the next. A week passed, then two, and the temporary arrangement hardened into something permanent without either of them acknowledging it. Mabel never said, "You can stay." Daniel never asked, "Can I remain?" They simply moved forward in parallel, their lives knitting together stitch by silent stitch. He learned the farm's rhythm by absorption. Mabel rose at 4:45 a.m., her internal clock precise as cathedral bells. By 5:15, she had coffee percolating and eggs scrambled if the hens were laying. Daniel began appearing in the kitchen doorway just as she set the second plate down, as if summoned by some vibration in the floorboards. She gave him small tasks at first: carry firewood, fill the chicken's water trough, weed the carrot row. He performed them with grave concentration, treating each chore as sacred duty. When he finished, he'd stand nearby, waiting for the next instruction, his body taut as a bowstring. "You don't have to stand at attention," she told him one afternoon as he waited beside the compost pile. "You can sit, rest." "I'm not tired," he said, those shadows pulled beneath his eyes. "Everyone gets tired. Even the land rests in winter." He considered this, then lowered himself onto an upturned bucket, perched ready to spring up if needed. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken negotiations. Mabel learned Daniel's tells, the slight tilt of his head when he was confused but wouldn't admit it, the way he bit the inside of his cheek when concentrating, the almost imperceptible lean toward her when she explained something he found interesting. She discovered he was quick with numbers. When she showed him how to measure seed spacing, 3 fingers between beans, a hand's width for squash, he nodded once and replicated it perfectly down a 20-foot row. When she taught him to test soil moisture by squeezing a handful, if it holds shape but crumbles when you poke it, that's planting gold. He repeated the gesture daily, building a tactile memory of the land's changing moods. Food was their unspoken crisis. Mabel's pantry was built for one, occasionally stretched to feed church visitors or the rare relative. Feeding a growing boy required recalculation. She began making larger batches of stew, adding extra potatoes to stretch the meat. She baked bread twice weekly instead of once. When eggs grew scarce, she traded jam for her neighbor's surplus. Daniel noticed the stretching. One evening, as she served him a bowl of bean soup with a slightly larger portion than her own, he pushed it back toward the pot's center. "I'm not that hungry," he said. "Eat, you're growing." "So are you." The boldness of his response startled her. Children in his position typically took whatever was offered, grateful or entitled. They didn't negotiate. They didn't observe the adult's portion size. "I've been grown," she said, pushing the bowl back. "Eat." He ate, but the next day she caught him hiding a dinner roll in his pocket. When she confronted him, he flushed but didn't look away. "For later," he said. "In case." "In case of what?" she almost asked. But the answer was obvious. In case the food ran out? In case this arrangement ended? In case he woke up one morning and found himself alone again, and needed something to carry him to the next unlikely kindness. She didn't scold him again. Instead, she began leaving an extra apple on the counter, a handful of nuts wrapped in cloth, small offerings he could pocket without ceremony. Survival, she understood, required its own rituals. Winter arrived brutal that year. Cold clamped down in early November and didn't relent. The farmhouse's old furnace groaned and rattled, heating only the rooms directly above it. They spent evenings in the kitchen, the wood stove crackling, Daniel doing schoolwork at the table, while Mabel mended clothes or read seed catalogs. It was during the December deep freeze that Daniel fell ill. At first it seemed like ordinary flu, fever, cough, lethargy. Mabel dosed him with honey and lemon, made broth from the last of the summer's frozen vegetables. But his temperature climbed, and his breathing grew shallow and rapid one night, as wind howled around the eaves. Mabel pressed her ear to his chest, hearing the ominous rattle she remembered from her sister's pneumonia. The nearest doctor was 12 miles away. Her truck's engine had been unreliable since autumn. She did the calculations with cold clarity. Walked to the neighbors for help? Their phone had been disconnected last she heard. Flagged down a car on the county road? At midnight in a blizzard? Then she remembered her father's tools. In the shed, wrapped in oilcloth, lay the set of hand-forged carpentry tools her father had brought from Scotland. Planes, chisels, saws with blades still sharp after 50 years. He taught her to use them, saying, "Tools are life, Mabel. They turn thought into substance." She hadn't touched them since his death, keeping them preserved like museum pieces. Now she bundled them into a canvas sack, wrapped herself in 2 coats, and set out into the storm. The walk to town took 2 hours through knee-deep drifts. Ice crystals needled her face. Twice she fell, the tools claking dully against her back. She thought of Daniel's breathing, that wet, struggling sound, and pushed forward. The pawnshop owner, an old man named Henry, who'd known her father, took one look at the tools, and then at her frozen face, and didn't haggle. He counted out $200, more than they were worth, and pressed the bills into her gloved hand. "Your dad would skin me if I didn't help his girl," he said gruffly. The doctor made a house call, rare as February roses. He listened to Daniel's chest, administered a shot of antibiotics, left pills with instructions. Another day without treatment. He didn't finish the sentence, just shook his head. That night, as Daniel's fever finally broke, he turned toward her in the dim lamplight. His voice was raspy, barely audible. "When I get rich," he whispered, each word an effort, "I'll pay you back, for everything." Mabel smoothed damp hair from his forehead. "Hush now. Life collects its debts in its own time. You just focus on getting better." He was asleep before she finished speaking, but the promise hung in the room like another presence. She sat with him until dawn, watching his chest rise and fall with steady rhythm, and wondered what strange tree might grow from this unlikely seed. When Daniel hid food, in case, did you see it as trauma response or thoughtful planning? What would that tell you about his past? Spring arrived not with a gentle thaw, but with a sudden surrender of winter's grip. Ice melted overnight, revealing mud so thick it sucked at boots with greedy insistence. Daniel, now 12 and having spent nearly 2 years on the farm, stood with Mabel at the edge of the north field, assessing the damage. The winter had taken its toll. 3 fence posts leaned at drunken angles, the shed's roof had developed a new sag, and the early lettuce Mabel had planted in the cold frame had frozen during a February night when the heater failed. "Looks bad," Daniel said, his voice lower than it had been last autumn, hinting at the changes to come. Mabel squinted against the morning sun. "Looks like work." That became the rhythm of the next 3 years. Work, adaptation, quiet growth. Daniel attended the Consolidated County School 30 minutes away by bus. Mabel packed his lunch, biscuits with jam, sometimes an apple, rarely meat. She noticed how he never traded with other children, how he ate quickly and without looking up, as if protecting what was his. School officials came each fall, a rotating cast of well-meaning strangers with clipboards and concerned expressions. They asked questions about guardianship, about income, about Daniel's home environment. Mabel answered plainly, showing them the clean if worn sheets on his bed, the stocked if simple pantry, the homework station at the kitchen table. "He's not yours legally," one woman pointed out gently during Daniel's 14th year. "There are foster programs with more resources." "He's mine in the ways that matter," Mabel replied, and something in her tone, not defensive, but declarative, silenced further argument. The farm continued its gradual decline, not to lapse, but a slow subsidence. The tractor's engine developed a knock that Mabel couldn't afford to fix. She and Daniel began preparing more fields by hand, turning soil with spades, their movements synchronized through repetition. Daniel's shoulders broadened, his hands grew calloused in patterns that mirrored hers, palm pads from tool handles, nicks from wire, soil permanently etched in the creases. People talked. In the general store, at church potlucks, at the feed supply. Mabel heard snippets as she passed. "Taking on another mouth to feed at her age. Boy seems quiet, too quiet maybe. Land's going fallow under her. Pride before the fall." She learned to distinguish between genuine concern and thinly veiled judgment. The former asked, "How are you managing?" The latter stated, "You shouldn't be managing at all." One Sunday, after service, Mrs. Gable, whose own farm had been bought by a development company the previous year, approached Mabel as she collected Daniel from Sunday school. "They're offering good money for the eastern parcels," Mrs. Gable said, without preamble. "Enough to set you up comfortable. The boy, too." Mabel looked toward where Daniel stood, examining a bulletin board, his Sunday shirt, a hand-me-down from a church donation box, straining across shoulders that had grown since Easter. "The land's not for sale, Eleanor." "Everything's for sale at the right price, even pride." That evening, as Mabel repaired a torn work shirt by lamplight, Daniel spoke without looking up from his algebra textbook. "Do we need money?" The question startled her. They never discussed finances directly. Her system was one of quiet rationing, buying day-old bread, using fabric until it frayed to threads, repairing rather than replacing. "We have what we need," she said, which was both true and not true. "Mrs. Gable's son has a new bike. Their barn got painted. Their land got sold." At 14, he was developing the ability to hold 2 contradictory truths simultaneously. That survival sometimes required compromise, and that some compromises cost more than they returned. "Would it be easier if I left?" he asked, so quietly she almost missed it. Mabel set down her needle. "Look at me." He did, his hazel eyes steady but guarded. "This farm has seen drought, flood, blight, and the Great Depression," she said. "It's still here. I'm still here. You're still here. We don't measure ease. We measure endurance." He nodded, but the question lingered in the room like wood smoke. The following spring brought the first official offer. A man in a suit too clean for country roads arrived in a sedan that gleamed despite the dust. He presented a business card that read Green Valley Development and talked about progress and community growth and fair market value. Mabel listened from her porch chair, hands folded in her lap. Daniel stood slightly behind her, having just returned from school, his backpack still slung over one shoulder. "The offer is more than generous," the man concluded, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not interested in selling," Mabel said. "Perhaps you should discuss it with your—" The man glanced at Daniel, searching for a category. "With your family." "I just did." The man's smile tightened. "These offers have expiration dates. The county's rezoning. Well, without development value, the taxes alone." He let the threat hang, polished and sharp. After he left, Daniel picked up the business card from where it had been placed on the porch rail. He studied it, then folded it neatly and put it in his pocket. "What are you doing?" Mabel asked. "Keeping it." "For what?" "In case." That night, Mabel lay awake long after the house settled into its nighttime sounds. She thought about her father buying this land in 1946 with mustering out pay, about her mother planting the first kitchen garden, about the decades of sweat and hope embedded in every acre. She thought about Daniel folding that business card with such deliberate care, as if it were a chess piece in a game only he understood. Outside, a whippoorwill called, its rhythmic cry like a heartbeat in the dark. Somewhere beyond her fences, development crept closer. But here, for now, the land still breathed. The promise, unspoken but growing, still held. Daniel turned 15 on a Tuesday. Mabel marked the occasion with a spice cake, a luxury she'd saved sugar for, and a new work shirt she'd sewn from sturdy denim. No presents, but she'd repaired his favorite boots, extending their life another season. He blew out the single candle, they saved the rest for Christmas, and offered her the first slice, a ritual they'd established. As they ate at the kitchen table, rain began to fall, a soft spring shower that tapped against the windows like polite fingers. "I've been thinking," Daniel said between bites, "about after high school." Mabel nodded, waiting. This was new territory. For years, their conversations had been rooted in the immediate. Today's chores, tomorrow's weather, this week's meals. The future hovered like a distant country they never planned to visit. "The agricultural extension program," he continued, not meeting her eyes. "They offer scholarships for farm kids." "You're not a farm kid," Mabel said gently. "Not by birth." "I am by everything that matters." He looked up then, and she saw the man he would become, the steady gaze, the set jaw, the quiet certainty. "I could learn new methods, irrigation, soil science. We could—" The sound of tires on gravel cut him off. Not the familiar crunch of the mail truck, or the sputter of Mr. Henderson's old Ford. This was a smooth, assertive sound, tires that expected roads to accommodate them. A black sedan, waxed to a liquid shine despite the rain, pulled up to the gate. It paused there, engine idling, as if the driver were consulting a map or gathering courage. Then it continued up the drive, stopping exactly 10 feet from the porch. Daniel went very still. His fork clattered against his plate. The car door opened. A man emerged, late 60s, silver hair trimmed with military precision, suit tailored to disguise a slight stoop. He carried an umbrella, but didn't open it, letting rain speckle his shoulders as he surveyed the farm with an expression Mabel couldn't read. Not disdain exactly, but something close to disbelief. "Daniel," the man said. His voice carried across the yard, clear and cool as the rain. Daniel stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. He moved to the window, his face pale. "That's my grandfather." Mabel felt the world shift beneath her feet. In 5 years, she had asked about Daniel's family exactly twice. Both times he'd said, "They're gone," with such finality she'd assumed death, not distance. She'd constructed a story in her mind. Orphaned, abandoned, the system's lost child. She hadn't considered that somewhere, someone might be looking. "You should invite him in," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. The conversation took place on the porch, the rain providing a curtain of privacy. Mabel brought coffee she'd made for the occasion, though the man, Charles Miller, declined with a curt shake of his head. He sat in the chair she offered, but didn't lean back, perching on the edge as if ready to depart at any moment. "I've been searching for 3 years," he said, addressing Daniel, but including Mabel in his peripheral vision. "Private investigators, missing persons reports. Your mother." He paused, and for the first time his composure cracked slightly. "She wasn't well when she took you and left." Daniel stood with his back against the house wall, arms crossed. "She was scared of you. She was ill, Daniel. The courts confirmed that, the custody agreement. She said you'd take everything." Charles sighed, a sound of exhausted patience. "I'm trying to give you everything. Education, legacy, a future that doesn't involve." He gestured vaguely at the farm, the fields, the sagging shed. She saw the war being waged there, between the boy who remembered comfort and the teenager who'd learned the value of honest work, between loyalty to a ghost mother and the living grandfather before him. "The terms are straightforward," Charles continued, pulling documents from a leather portfolio. "Full legal guardianship. Boarding school. St. Andrews has an excellent agricultural program, ironically. Summer internships with my firm. Upon college graduation, a position in the family business." He laid the papers on the small table between them. They were crisp, official, dense with legalese that promised a life of structured opportunity. Daniel looked at Mabel. In his eyes, she saw the question he couldn't ask aloud. "What should I do?" She thought of the scholarship he'd mentioned minutes before, of the way his face lit up when he discovered a new way to rotate crops or naturally deter pests. She thought of the worn boots by the door, the patched jeans, the quiet nights studying by lamplight. Then she thought of the world beyond her fences, a world that offered science, resources, connections. "You should go," she said. Daniel flinched as if struck. "You don't waste a chance meant for you," she continued, her voice low but clear. "Not for pride, not for loyalty, not even for love." Charles Miller looked at her properly for the first time, his assessing gaze softening slightly. "There would be compensation for your care." Mabel shook her head. "There's no debt. Everyone has debts, Mrs. Hart. Not this kind." Daniel moved then, crossing the porch in 2 strides, to kneel beside her chair. At 15, he was nearly her height, even crouched. He took her work-roughened hand in both of his grip tight enough to ache. "I won't forget," he whispered. The words meant only for her. "I promise." She squeezed back, then reached into her apron pocket. She'd prepared for this moment without knowing she was preparing. A folded sheet of paper containing her name, the farm's address, the phone number she'd had installed last year for emergencies. "Just in case," she said, pressing it into his palm. He hugged her then, a clumsy, fierce embrace that smelled of rain and wood smoke, and the particular scent of boy on the cusp of manhood. Then he stood, squared his shoulders, and followed his grandfather to the waiting car. Mabel didn't watch them drive away. She stayed on the porch as rain turned to drizzle, then ceased altogether. She listened as the sedan's sound faded, replaced by the drip of water from eaves, the distant call of a mourning dove, the vast and sudden silence of a house emptied of its heartbeat. Inside, on the kitchen table, 2 plates of uneaten spice cake sat gathering flies. She cleared them slowly, wrapping Daniel's portion in wax paper for later, though she knew she wouldn't eat it. The cake would grow stale, then mold, and eventually she'd feed it to the chickens, completing the cycle. That night, for the first time in 5 years, she ate alone. The silence was no longer companionable. It was accusatory. Every creak of the house asked, "Why did you let him go?" Every rustle of wind through the fields whispered, "You're alone again." She washed the single plate, dried it, put it away. She checked the locks, turned off the lights, climbed the stairs. In Daniel's room, still his room, she realized, she paused in the doorway. His bed was neatly made, his few books arranged on the shelf, his repaired boots waiting by the closet door as if for tomorrow's chores. Mabel closed the door gently. She didn't open it again for a week, and when she finally did, it wasn't to clean or pack or repurpose, but simply to stand in the space where a boy had become part of her story, and to feel the shape of the hole he'd left behind. And as Daniel drove away in that sleek black car, the dust settled over Mabel Hart's life. For a while, she returned to her fields, her routines, her solitude. She planted, she harvested, she endured. But beyond her fence line, a different kind of seed was being planted, one of greed, of paperwork, of quiet corruption. The developers didn't forget her land just because the boy had left it. In fact, they saw his departure as their opportunity. What Mabel couldn't know then, what she'd only discovered 20 years later, on the worst morning of her life, was that the world was changing in ways designed to erase people like her. And the promise that echoed in her empty farmhouse would be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined. So what happened in those 20 silent years? How did a simple farm become ground zero in a war of paperwork and power? And when the county trucks finally lined up at her gate, was the promise made by a feverish boy just a memory, or was it already on its way? This is where part 1 of our story ends, but the reckoning is just beginning. If you need to know how Mabel Hart faced the forces arrayed against her, if you believe that a promise can outlast decades, distance, and doubt, then you cannot miss part 2. Before you go, subscribe right now and hit that bell. Part 2 is already in production, and subscribers will be the first to know the moment it drops. Like this video if you are rooting for Mabel and Daniel. It tells us you want more stories of courage and connection. Comment below with your prediction. What do you think Daniel was doing all those years? Was he forgetting or preparing? We read every single one. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that the seeds of kindness we plant today might just grow into shelters we need tomorrow. The helicopter is coming. The confrontation is inevitable. And the truth is about to rewrite everything.